We are live. Hi, everyone. Who's here? I see Johnny's here from California. Nice to see you, Johnny. Also, Elias from Sweden. Nice to have you. Get ready to rumble. We're going to do that today. Gunti's here from Portugal. Nice to have you. Who else is here? Say hi in the comments, who you are, where you're from, where in the world are we, who's representing here today? I'm very excited. We have a lot of people already coming. Balaram, Mike, he's American, but he's in Germany. And who else do we have here? Everyone say hi to Jay.
Hi.
Jay is joining us today because he's going to talk more about music licensing. We have Lei from Toronto, Iago out of Brazil. Nice to have you. And Jay he's the founder of something called Slam Academy. He's also running the music business department at Augsburg. Did I say that right?
You did. Yeah, good.
University. And he's out of Minneapolis. So I'm really excited that he's here with us today to talk more about, something that I'm also lacking information of. So I have tons of questions as well. And everyone knows how I am. I tend to go into details. So I really want to know, how does this work? So who else do we have here? One Man Dancing. Hi there. Augustine from Edinburgh, UK. All right. So I'm going to give it. Jay, why don't you introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Well, let's see. Like Rebecca said, I run the music business program at Augsburg University. I also have kind of two main companies that I've started and work with. One is Slam Academy that does classes focused specifically on music production, all areas of music production, recording, all that stuff. And that has physical locations here in Minneapolis, but also in 3 other places in the country. We have Chicago, Indianapolis, and Denver locations. And then I have another company called Punkademic Music that does just online classes. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that later, but that's kind of my main 3 teaching outlets, I guess.
And you're a musician, right?
Yeah, I somehow in there find time to write music, and I've had some good luck with some records I put out and some things I've written for. I have a kind of a traditional composer background. I did my doctorate in music composition, so I went to school for that. So I've worked with orchestras and chamber music and all that stuff. But primarily what I do now is electronic music, even though I just put out a string quartet. So I've done a lot of different stuff, and I've gotten lucky with some film projects and some games and things like that. So I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting area for do-it-yourself musicians, right? That really want to make it and make a living out of creating music. And with streaming, it's really hard to do that if you compare so looking at alternative revenue stream is definitely a way to go for musicians, and music licensing is an interesting area. So we're gonna get the presentation up here, and then the stage is all. Everyone, if you have any questions throughout, or if there's anything unclear, I'm going to be, gathering all the questions in the comments. So go ahead and use the comments here for questions. So if there's anything that's unclear, I'm going to interrupt Jay and be like, they don't understand. But if there's, questions that can be also done towards the end, just write them down and then I'll gather them. And then we're going to go through all the questions at the end. And I think, Jay, you said you even had an extra hour. So in case there's tons of questions, we can go into them. So
yeah, I got some extra time.
All right, cool. All right. So I'm going to give you the stage. It's all yours.
All right. Cool. Okay. So The main kind of strategy, so to speak, that we're going to talk about is this thing that I call capture and grow. So we're going to do two things, and we're going to focus on two different things, but they work together. You got to have both, pretty much. So capture means there's probably a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, depending on what you're doing, but probably your music is generating money already, and you're just not getting it. Like, it's just kind of out here, and you need to basically stick the bucket out and get it to fall into your bucket. So money is happening. It's just not making its way into your pocket. So there's a couple fairly simple things that we can set up that'll make sure that money goes right into your pocket. Once you have all that stuff set up, you will be able to go after some licensing opportunities. You cannot go after licensing opportunities unless you have that first stuff set up. Okay, so the capture is capture money we've already got going, and the grow stuff is increasing the amount of money that our music is making by through licensing opportunities. Okay, so I think I got ahead of myself a little bit. That's basically what this slide says. This thing I wrote here under big picture, I think it's important to note here that I'm not talking about writing new music for any specific reason. I'm talking about how to make money from the music you already have written, that you've already made. You certainly will apply these things to all future music that you make, but you can do this kind of backwards. You can say, that piece I wrote 5 years ago that got some good radio play, is there any money sitting in some vault for me somewhere? There might be, actually. So we're going to talk about how to get that. Two quick little disclaimers before we get into the nitty-gritty. Number one, I've tried to make this is a presentation I do all the time, and I've tried to make it really not US specific. There is a couple things that I will point out that I'm going to say this is how it's done in the US. It might be slightly different. The concept is going to be the same, but some of the minutia might be slightly different in different countries. So I'll point those out when we get to them. It's one in particular. Disclaimer number two is we are going to talk a little bit about some ways that the law works. And I just want to say, I am not a lawyer. I'm a music dork. So don't take your legal advice from me. If you're ever given a contract and you don't understand it, get a lawyer to read it for you. I'm not a lawyer. I've just been doing this a whole bunch. So that's how I know how to do it, basically. So with that in mind, I always like to start this conversation by talking about this idea of the currency of copyright, which is kind of a weird thing that I like to think about. But basically, when you have a piece of intellectual property, and intellectual property means anything you make with your mind, whether it's music or a painting or a napkin doodle or a little poem, anything. Any of that is intellectual property, and you own it. Once you make it, it is yours. But the crazy thing about it is that when you make these things, there's a whole list of rights that get associated to them. So if you make something, if you squiggle a little napkin doodle, all of these rights just automatically get generated and exist. And they are yours, and you have them, and you can sell them, you can rent them, you can lease them, you can trade or barter with them, you can do all kinds of stuff with all of these rights. So the most widely known is copyright. That is one of these rights. So we're not going to go into the weeds on copyright here. I could do like a whole 5-hour class on the weeds of copyright. But essentially, as many of you probably know, it is the thing that keeps that gives you the right to copy your work, and nobody else the right to copy your work. That's why it's called copyright. But that's only kind of the tip of the iceberg. There are all these other rights that you get when you have a piece of intellectual property. Things like the performance right. That's the right to perform it and to limit who else can perform it. There's the mechanical right, which is the right to record it. It's called mechanical because of old player pianos. It's a long story, but mechanical right. The synchronization right is the right to put that piece of music in a film or video or synchronize it to picture. It's weird that it's called synchronization right. It has to do with old silent movies, and they had a pianist playing in sync to the old silent movie. Anyway, still called synchronization right, but what it is the right to put the music into any kind of fixed media, we call it. So film, video, television, anything like that. A game even counts. Dramatic rights are the right you have to put the music into theatrical production. And it's interesting that that's a whole separate right than synchronization rights. It's weird. Dramatic rights are also called grand rights, by the way. So if you see those, they're the same thing, different terms. Right of publicity is the right for you to control your image as it's attached to a work. For sale doctrine is what the rights of someone you sell it to, they have. There's all kinds of these. There's a bunch more, actually. So when it comes to this idea of capturing money that's already there, what we're going to hone in on is the performance right. That is not exactly what it sounds like. It is your right to perform it, but it's also the right you have to get paid for performances, for uses of it. And performance doesn't mean you playing that piece of music in a club or something like that. It does mean that, but it also means any public display of the work. So let's change intellectual property to song, because that's what we're talking about, songs. So if you have a song and you've recorded it and it gets played in a hair salon as background music, that is a public display of your work. Even though it's not you performing it, the recording is a performance for the purposes of this right. Does that make sense? We'll talk about this more in just a minute. But basically, you're owed money for that. So come back to that in a second. When we get into this idea of licensing, we're primarily talking about mechanical rights, a little bit, but mostly synchronization rights. Cool. I think that's everything I want to say about that. The currency of copyright thing, every time I talk about this, I just kind of can't get over how real it is. There's at least one case where that I know about where someone was sued and they lost and they had to pay the fine in song. This is John Lennon, actually. John Lennon was sued, and to settle the lawsuit that he lost, he said, okay, I'll give you 3 songs. And so people have paid for things in that way. When I bought my house, I said, I offered them, the people selling it, money, but also I said, I'll include a song. And it was just weird enough to where they said, okay, and it worked. It's just a strange world. Anyway, moving on. Okay, so capturing money you're already owed. We're going to talk about that performing right. So, whole bunch of stuff here. The story goes, the reason that this works the way it works is that back in 1917, there's a composer named Victor Hubert. Maybe you're familiar with Victor Hubert. He was a songwriter, back in the 19 teens, Tin Pan Alley stuff. Doesn't really matter. Anyway, he wrote songs, and back then you didn't really put out recordings so much as you put out books. You put out sheet music books, and so Victor Hubert one night went to a restaurant in 1917 and he had a very nice meal. But during the meal, there was a pianist playing music in the restaurant, and the pianist was playing a book of music by Victor Hubert. He was playing his own music. Well, the pianist was just playing music, but Victor Hubert was hearing his own music being played. And that music was being used to entertain the customers all night long. And so when his bill came, Victor Hubert said, "No, I'm not going to pay this bill because you've been using my music all night to entertain your customers. You should be paying me." Right? So this snowballed into something that eventually ended up in court and eventually ended up in the US Supreme Court, where he was found to be correct. He was owed money for them using his music to entertain their patrons because they were making money off his music and he wasn't getting paid for it. So the court said, okay, if we're going to let this happen, we need to have some kind of organization that monitors this and pays artists for work that gets used. This became known as the PRO, or Performing Rights Organization. Okay, so when I write PRO, that's what it means, Performing Rights Organization. The courts set up the first one, and it was called ASCAP, ASCAP. It stands for American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers. And what ASCAP's job was to make sure that composers, songwriters, were getting paid for uses of their work. So fast forward a little bit. Now we have a whole bunch of PROs. There's a different PRO for every country. Most countries have one PRO, and you need to register with them for them to know about you. In the US, we have 3 PROs. I've listed them there: ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. So whatever it is in your country, this is what's different per country, but whatever it is, you need to find them and register with them. I'll talk more about that in a second. So these organizations are going to monitor everything they can for public displays of your work. So they do include live performances. They do include performances of recordings. Whenever the piece of music, whether it's live or recorded, is used for something, that's when a royalty is generated and is owed to you. So you could think of this like if you play a gig in a music venue, okay, you might get paid for your performance. Okay, let's say you're getting like 50% of the door, so you walk out with, you know, a couple $100 and you're happy, you got paid. But you got paid for your performance. You didn't get paid for the public use of your music, assuming you were playing your own music. That's separate. It doesn't seem like it should be, but that's just the way it works. That's separate. So you might get paid for your performance, but you've got another royalty check coming for the public use of your music. Or you should, if you have everything set up right. Now, it's not going to be hundreds of dollars in that case. It's probably going to be, it might be 10 or 20 bucks. But if you tour, that adds up. If your music gets played on the radio, then every time it gets played, you're owed a royalty. If your music is on, you know, a Spotify playlist and it gets played as the background music in your local hardware store, you're owed a royalty. So how does this work? This works by anywhere that plays music is supposed to have a license. They pay a blanket license to the PRO that just says, basically, I have the right to play music here. And then they poll the the PRO polls the place, and they say, what did you play on this date? And they have to try to keep track. No one's perfect at keeping track of every piece of music that happens, so it's very common for things to get missed. Most of the time, things get missed. But if you're getting a lot of performances, you will get royalties from this system. Now, there's a loophole here. Not a loophole. There's a kind of special thing here, and that is the publisher. So going back to 1917 with Victor Hubert, when this was all set up, this was 1917, so we barely had recordings. We certainly didn't have streaming. We didn't have any of this stuff, right? So the courts, when they put this together, couldn't imagine a world in which an artist could just put out music on their own. Everybody has to have a publisher because you just have to. That's how music works. And that isn't true anymore. So you don't need a publisher. But the way the law was written back then assumes everybody has a publisher. So the way the royalty works, 100% of the time without exception, the way the royalty works is whenever a royalty is generated, the songwriter gets 50% and the publisher gets 50%. Always. So if you do not have a publisher, you still only get 50%. And that other 50% disappears into the ether. I think actually the PRO keeps it. So you have to have a publisher. When we're talking about publishers, we're not talking about sheet music. That's really not what publishers do anymore. And in small, rare cases, they do sheet music stuff. But the role of the publisher, primarily at this point, is to manage licenses for the song or the catalog of songs of the artist. So everybody has a publisher, whether you know it or not. If you are interested in doing any licensing or anything, you have a publisher because the publisher's role is to manage that stuff. If you got no one else, you're managing it yourself. So congrats, you're a publisher. And you can do that with the PRO. So when you sign up with one of these organizations, with the PRO in your country, you have to sign up twice. Once as a writer and once as a publisher. It's totally legal. It's not a loophole. Everybody does this. And in fact, some PROs have this kind of automatically built in now. So you're going to set it up and you're going to say that you are the publisher of your work. That way you get 100% of the royalties. And it actually works really fun because when you get one of these royalties, they come out quarterly most of the time. So 4 times a year, you'll get a check that says, here's your royalties. And if you're the publisher, if you have that set up right, the publisher royalty is always a month behind. So every time you get a royalty check, you might be like, oh, cool, like an extra $500 I didn't know about. But bonus, the exact same check is coming again next month to your publisher, which is you. So we have to have all this stuff set up. Okay, let me, we did the publisher stuff. I'm just scanning through my notes. So one thing you're going to do, I'm going to give you kind of a list of things at the end of this talk on things like, this is what you need to do. The first one is going to be register with a PRO if you're not already. If you're in the US, ASCAP and BMI are the 2 big ones. CSAC is different. CSAC works a little bit different. I don't know a lot about it. It's much, much, much smaller. That doesn't really mean you get paid less. It just means it's different. It works a little different. ASCAP and BMI are basically the same. So throw a dart, pick one. I'm ASCAP because I've always been ASCAP. I don't know. Somebody told me to join ASCAP at one point. BMI is just as good. When you sign up, you will need to input your music. And you don't need to upload recordings or sheet music or anything. All you're going to do is type in the name of any songs that you have written and recorded that are active, that you care about. You just need the title, the length, and the instrumentation. I think that's all you need. And you're going to input all those, and then it'll start tracking those for you. Cool. So get that done. I'm going to move on. So doing that will get you all of those performance royalties for any uses of your music, with one exception. There's one little thing that the performing rights organizations don't cover. And this is the thing that like 99% of musicians I work with did not know about, this one little thing. So even if you're already savvy to the PRO and you're set up and you're doing that and everything's great, you may not have done this one thing. And that is, there's a weird little thing called webcasting, which is like a super outdated term. This came to this got set up in I think the year 2000, and they were trying to update this whole system, and they thought, oh, webcasting. And they used this term that no one knows what it means anymore. But what it means is non-interactive streaming, which is even worse term than webcasting. What non-interactive streaming means is any kind of internet distribution of your music that the user can't select the song. Okay, so interactive would mean like I can type in like Rebecca's music and queue up a song by her. That's interactive. Non-interactive would be something like Pandora, where I say, play me songs in this genre, and it just starts playing songs. Any kind of internet radio where it's playing stuff in a genre, if you have like a smart speaker or something like that, and you say, play me metal tunes, and one of your tunes comes up, then that's non-interactive. Things like that. Things where you can't say, play me this specific song. So those things are not covered by any of the PROs at all. You have to sign up for a whole other thing. But it's easy. It's called Sound Exchange. So you're going to go onto the Sound Exchange website and you're going to sign up. The cool thing about Sound Exchange is that they actually hold money that they don't know what to do with. So if you've got a couple albums out and they're getting a little bit of traction on the internet, you might sign up for Sound Exchange and you'll get a little alert right away that says, hey, we've been looking for you. Here's some money that we've been collecting on your behalf. A friend of mine got $5,000 when he signed up, because they had this like $5,000 worth of money from kind of a reasonably nice little hit that he had. And he didn't know about Sound Exchange. So he signed up and there was like $5,000 out there. When I signed up, there was a little pot of money waiting for me too. It wasn't $5,000, but it wasn't bad. So do not forget about Sound Exchange. Most people do. But it's a whole different thing. I'm going to answer that question that just popped up on my screen. Sound Exchange is global as far as I know. That is a good question, though. I believe it is. But I don't know. I don't know, actually. I think it is. I don't think I've ever heard of region-specific versions of Sound Exchange. So I don't know about any other country-specific things that are Sound Exchange. So I think Sound Exchange is probably global. Other revenue that you might be missing out on, if you have released music through a distributor, meaning it's on iTunes and you're not with a major record label, then you have used something like DistroKid, CD Baby, whatever those services are, any of those that you've used, they are collecting royalties for you, and they're streaming royalties, so they're not huge, but you've got to make sure that you've got all that stuff set up in their back end, or else you're going to miss out on those streaming royalties. So I've seen people release albums and then forget to actually set up the stuff that collects the royalties. For that, you just use their interface. It seems like kind of an obvious thing, but make sure you do it. Okay. Now, let's talk about licensing. So licensing is basically going to take advantage of sync, which is our synchronization rights, right to synchronize, and mechanical rights. That's the right to record. It doesn't have much to do with mechanical rights, but a little bit, because we're always dealing with a recording here. A license deal is effectively a lease of your rights for a specific purpose. So you would say, I'm going to give this particular person the right to use my music in this film or commercial or whatever, and there may be some restrictions on it. And at some point, the right is going to end. So you'll say, you have the right to use this song for this amount of time, or in this region, or something like that. Region-specific licensing is a big deal that happens a lot for various reasons. You can get a licensing deal that is restricted. Most of the time people do this because they want to not be associated with a product in their country. It's weird. It's like if I did a license for like, I don't know, a brand of mustard, and so a mustard company went to me and they said, we've got this commercial, we want to use your track in this commercial. I might be like, okay, cool, I'm happy to take your money, but I don't want everyone to know that I'm the mustard guy. I don't want to be the mustard guy. So I'm cool with that in Asia. So you can do that in Asia because I don't have much of a footprint in Asia. So you can use my music in Asia for that, but not in the US or Europe, whatever. Yeah, a lot of reasons for that. So there's kind of a cool, well, I put in the presentation the influx of licensing opportunities. So let me tell you about why licensing is so important before we dive into how to set this all up. There's kind of two things that happened simultaneously that made licensing such a kind of a gold rush in music over the last decade or so. So the first one is kind of comes from the film industry. And what happened was the way movie studios worked, still work, but less and less, but was they would make a movie, and when they were done filming the movie, they would do an edit of the movie, get it down to its almost final product, and it would have no music in it. So no music. And then after the edit, they would send it to a composer and say, write music for this, and then they would get that music back. So that's the way it worked for a long time. And film studios and directors especially got real nervous about that. That made them really nervous, because what would happen is they would not know what they're going to get back, and it scared them. It's like, I think of it as like they just lacked the imagination to visualize what the composer was going to do, and they didn't understand the language of the composer, so they never really knew what they were going to get back, and that was scary to them. So they started doing this system that we call temp queues. And what temp queues are is they take their edit of the movie and then they put in music that they have no rights to use, just like things from that they find online, that they find here or there, that they grab from some other movie, and they just slap them in the movie. And then they send that version of the film to the composer, and they say, your job is now to rewrite all of that music that we put in there in a way that keeps us from getting sued. So we want you to sound just like the music we put in there, but different enough to where it's not recognizable. So then the composer has this crappy job of basically copying this music that's in there. I've had to do gigs like this, and it sucks. It's like super boring, and it's actually really hard because you have to make it sound just like it, but at the same time, not at all like it. And it's just an impossible task. So it sucks for everybody. But the film studios, the directors, they basically know what they're going to get. So they're slightly happier. But after doing that for a little while, film studios started saying, wait a minute, why don't we just skip the whole composer deal? Why don't we just take these temp cues, spend the money, and just buy those songs and just leave them in there? Then we're done. And we don't have to deal with these crazy composers. So that worked. But that was super expensive. So a new industry was born, and that industry was called the licensing house. So the licensing house is a company that goes out all over the place, finds a whole bunch of music, and licenses it, gets licenses for it, gets permission to use that music, and they build their own little library. So they take that library and they go to the film studios and they say, here is this huge chunk of music. You can use whatever you want. It's already licensed. So then the directors are like, oh, this is great. Yes, score music is what we were talking about with the score, with that idea of, well, this applies to both score and source music, if that's what you're asking. But yes, this is score music, but also soundtrack music. It all works this way. So the licensing house had all of this music, and it was cheap for the studios to do it. So that kind of is where we are now, where there are these licensing houses that exist. Some films and even some TV shows, very rare, but sometimes a TV show still has a composer that writes the score. But it's big budget stuff. It's not the smaller stuff. Smaller stuff, even for the score, is going to use licensed music that they can just plop in there and be done. So your job is to get into those libraries that those studios are using. Now, there's a second thing that was happening kind of at the same time that led to this gold rush of licensed music, and that is this, I'm going to give a very opinionated statement, this horrible thing called reality TV. Reality TV led to the biggest influx in licensing music. Because if you think about it, next time you're watching like the Real Housewives of whatever, no judgment, try to find a spot where there's no music playing, no background music, no nothing. You'll be hard pressed. There's always music. Those shows have music nonstop in the background. And when the editors are putting those shows together, they've got hundreds of hours of random footage of people just doing nothing. And they need to edit fast, just really, really fast. So they're chopping and chopping and chopping, and they just need to grab music and throw it in there and grab music and throw it in there. So what they need is one of these libraries that they know that they can just grab any music that they want, and they have the rights to use it. It's cleared. So reality TV has really given us the opportunities of licensed music. And if you just get into licensing, one of the first things you get might be reality TV, because they're just always buying stuff. And when I say reality TV, I'm not just talking about like Real Housewives or whatever. There's more than that to reality TV. Everything that the History Channel puts out, everything that National Geographic Channel puts out, like fishing shows, sports shows, all that stuff just needs tons and tons of music. It's nonstop. So there is some good-ish reality TV if you think about like Nature Channel, like nature shows, things like that. That leads me to point out one little side note, and that is that I've never worked for the BBC, but word on the street is that for any licensing deal, the BBC pays out 3 times higher than everywhere else. So, FYI, if you have an opportunity to do a BBC gig, go for it. Even if it's for like a nature show. Okay, anyway. Okay, right side of the screen here. Why you need to be ready for licensing. I think I meant to write what you need to be ready for licensing here. So what you need to have set up in order to go after licensing. Number one, you need to have a PRO set up. All that stuff needs to be done. Nobody's going to do a licensing deal with you if you don't have a PRO set up. The first question in any contract is going to be, what is your member number for what PRO are you with? They have to know that, or else nothing gets tracked and no one gets paid. So you have to have that stuff set up. Number two, a recording of the work. Now this is somewhat complicated. For licensing, you're never licensing sheet music. You're never licensing anything like that. It's got to be a recording. Most of the time, it needs to be a professional quality recording. Not 100% of the time does it need to be a professional quality recording. There are cases where what I think that question was getting at, the last question I saw about score, there are basically 2 kinds of music in film and TV, debatably a third, but mostly there's 2 kinds of music, and that's what we call score and what we call source. So score music means you're watching a show and there's like orchestral music or any kind of music, but it's like just happening around, it's like filling out the sound. Source music means that there's music coming from somewhere on the screen. Like there's a person playing a guitar in the corner, and so you're hearing guitar music. That's called source music. Or there's a radio on in the corner, and that's what's playing the music, and we're led to believe that. Or there's a band playing, or something like that. So if it's score music, whether it's orchestral or rock songs, pop songs, whatever, then it needs to be a really high quality recording. But if it's source music, it doesn't necessarily need to be. If a music supervisor, who is the one at a production studio who would be making this decision, is looking for music for a scene, and the scene has like a beat up old radio in the corner, and someone turns it on, and what music are they hearing? They might be open to something that's not recorded perfectly for that. So it can be done, but most of the time you want as good of a quality recording as possible. Next thing you need, that recording needs to be completely owned by you. It needs to not have any samples in it. If you've used samples, they need to be cleared samples. You can like run that gamble if you really want to and put uncleared samples in there, but if the film, you're going to sign a contract that basically says if there's any issues with the samples in this song and we, the film studio, get sued, you're paying the bill. So if you have anything like that in there, clear samples or disguise them, in a way that makes them unrecognizable. It will be an issue. Also, if there are any other copyright issues involved, you can't license a cover song, for example. You can't license a song that quotes another song in some way. It's got to be totally 100% your copyright. And then the last thing on my little list here, it can't have any existing licensing agreements on it. If it does, that's not always a deal breaker, but it usually is. Maybe places might be open to like territory things like I was talking about. But in general, no one's going to want to license something that's already licensed for another purpose, unless you're a mega huge rock star. If you're a mega huge rock star, you can license a song to a truck commercial and then a beer commercial, and it can be the same song and nobody cares. But you're probably not that mega huge rock star. If there are any mega huge rock stars in here, let me know. Okay. Okay, so how to get these deals? The licensing house is this place I talked about. They're kind of the middle person of the industry. They are a company that builds libraries. These companies already have connections into the industry. These connections that are going to be really hard, if not impossible, for you to get on your own. Every major city has a few companies that do licensing. You'd be surprised. Here in Minneapolis, we're not an entertainment hub by any means, but there are like 3 or 4 companies that are pretty big companies that do licensing. Obviously, the entertainment hubs like Los Angeles, New York, Nashville have a licensing company on every corner of the block. But whatever city you are in, go to your nearest major city if you're not in a major city, and look for a licensing house. You can find them online. Every city's got a few of them. Every major city, I should say. If for no other reason, then every city has needs for a licensing house, right? It's not just sending music to LA to be used in the next Hollywood movie. It's also local advertisements, local productions of anything, local game companies. All of these places need licenses. So what the licensing house is going to do, they're going to prepare a playlist that hopefully has your music in it, and they're going to shop your tracks in those playlists for specific projects. So what will happen is something like a TV show might say, we need like scary sounding guitar music for a scene. So they're going to call up maybe 2 or 3 of these licensing houses that they know. And they're going to say, look, we need scary sounding guitar music. And those 3 licensing houses are going to say, great, I'm going to send you 5 songs. So now they're going to get 15 songs. And they're going to pick however many they need from those 15. So your job is to be one of those 15. If you just send your music directly to the production studio, it's probably not going to get listened to, but if it does, you're going to be one of like 10 million people sending them stuff. So your odds are better to be one of those 15 than one of 10 million. The licensing house is also going to negotiate the deal, so you never have to deal with any of that, because your deal is with the licensing house. You're going to sign a deal with them that's going to give them the right to grant the synchronization license to the production company. Okay, so effectively, you're going to sign them off as the publisher. More on that in a second. Yeah, and then they're going to try to sell your music because they make money when you do. That's kind of how these systems work. Wrong window. Okay, how they get paid. So typically, the licensing house is going to take your publishing royalty. Now let's think about this. So remember what I said at the beginning. System is set up where with performance royalties, we get 50% as the writer, and the publisher gets 50%. We are going to give the licensing house our publisher royalty, which means we're going to give them 50% of our royalty. Okay? That can sting at first before you think about it, but if you think about it, it's actually still a good deal, because this money still flows through the performance royalties system, because that system exists and it's a public display of your work. So when you give them 50%, basically when you give them the publishing royalty, it's good because that means they're not going to make money unless you make money. They have an incentive to sell your music, to get your music in stuff. That's what they want. That's what you want. But here's the danger. The danger is that they don't have your publishing just for the purposes of licensing. They have your publishing for that song. So let's say an example would be, say I wrote a song. I'm really happy with the song. I think it's got a lot of commercial appeal. I think I could get it used in a show or something. So I go to the licensing house that I work with a lot, and I say, I got this new song. I want you guys to shop it around. They listen to it. They like it. They're on board. So I sign off publishing to them. Okay, so now they have the publishing. Now they shop it around, and they just have bad luck with it. They just can't get a deal for it, and that's fine. That happens sometimes. But at the same time, I'm out playing gigs and pushing the recording, and suddenly this thing takes off, and I've got a hit. That's great. I'm getting tons of radio play. I'm getting tons of gigs with this thing. This song is all over the place. The publisher just made, or the licensing house just made a ton of money. See how that worked? Because they have the publishing. So if I am really successful with that song and they didn't do anything, then they're still going to get the publisher cut because they have the publishing. I signed over the publishing to them. That's the risk. So big risk, big reward is the situation here. If they get it into a show or something, it's probably going to generate a lot of royalties. If they don't, you miss out on the publishing. So in my case, it's always been worth the risk. But only if you're working with one of these licensing houses that you think is legit and is actually working for you. If you sign up with a licensing house that's just like, yeah, we'll take your stuff, I'm not really interested, but sure, then that's not a very good fit. You should never pay to be part of a licensing house library. There are some out there. There are some opportunities you can get to get included into a library for a fee. That tends to be not very legit in my experience. I'm not going to say that those are scams, but they're not good. So unless it's a non-exclusive deal, yeah. If it's a non-exclusive deal, I still wouldn't go with a kind of a pay-to-play licensing house, because a non-exclusive deal would mean that you can license it like multiple times. It's not an exclusive license. Any publishing deal, is that true? The way ASCAP is set up, the way PROs are set up, you can only have one publisher. All publishing is exclusive by nature. You can, per song that is. You can have multiple publishers, but you can only have one publisher per song. Yes, that is accurate. So you could publish this song on your own and this song through the licensing house. There are publishers and licensing houses that will go after your whole catalog. I say go after like it's a bad thing. That will want to sign your whole catalog. I'll say, we want everything you've got and we're going to try to license it. That can be great. That can be huge for you. But you're giving away your publishing. That's the thing to worry about. I know one singer-songwriter here in town who's a friend of mine who has had a lot of luck with licensing with kind of pop songs. And what he always does is he releases an album, he tours with that album, does everything he can with that album for 2 years before he signs it over to a licensing contract. And if the album's still doing great after 2 years, he doesn't sign it over for licensing. So anything that he gets licensed is at least 2 years old. Is that only during the lease? I don't understand the context of that question. What was I talking about just before that? Is it only during the lease? Oh, will they get the royalty only during the lease? The publishing royalty during the lease? Yes, actually, that should be correct. Once your contract with the licensing house expires, well, two things can happen when your contract expires. It can auto-renew, which is what mine do, so you've got to be on top of it. But if it doesn't auto-renew, and even if it does auto-renew and you're on top of it, the publishing will get signed back over to you. Yes. So you can get the publishing back if that happens. Okay, so if you get one of these licensing houses interested in you, and I'll talk a little bit about how you would do that in just a second, but once you do get there, what do they need from you? They need the track, first of all, obviously. They need a signed contract. It's going to give them the publishing authority. And the third thing is they're often going to request the stems. If you're not familiar with what stems are, that's the individual tracks from this recording session. The reason for that is because they're going to need to make quick edits sometimes. And sometimes the licensing people will do this, and sometimes the studios will do this. More often the studios will do this. So it might be that a show says, this is a great track for me to use in this scene, but I need a version of this track without lyrics in it, without a vocal track, which is very common. A lot of times shows, if there's dialogue going on, they don't want dialogue, they don't want words in the music. So if they have the stems, they can just throw that together really quick. They may also request, well, so with stems, they might also do something like change the arrangement around a little bit. So like the intro goes a little bit longer, so they loop a section of the intro before the drums come in or something like that. You got to be okay with them doing, like, basically messing up your arrangement. That's how it works. They may also ask you for a clean version if you have a song that has lyrics that have words that you can't put on TV. They'll insist you give them a clean version, either edited with new words or beeped, although they prefer usually not beeped. You're never going to hear something that's licensed that has a beep in it. So sometimes you can just mute the bad word. Sometimes they want you to put a new word in there. However, works best. Okay, can you get license deals on your own? Yes, but it's really tricky. There are things like, there's services like this thing called Taxi that maybe some of you have come across in the past. Taxi is kind of one of those pay-to-play things. What they tell you is you sign up with Taxi for a certain amount of money. It's a lot. And then you will get opportunities to pitch your songs to projects. That's true, but there are a lot of members of Taxi. There's very little curation, so the likelihood that the studios are really listening for Taxi music is not very high, because they know that what they're getting through Taxi is just kind of like anything. So they'd rather trust one of these licensing houses that consistently sends them good music. So some people have had good luck with services like Taxi. I did Taxi for like a year when I was younger, and I got a couple bites, but nothing really went anywhere. I didn't really like it, and it was super expensive. So yeah, and then I wrote here, the entertainment industry is built on connections. Much easier to use connections already established by the licensing house than to build your own from scratch. Okay, so what you should do today. Things that, like, immediately when we wrap up here, that you should just sit down and do. Number one, get your PRO stuff all set up if you haven't yet. So pick a PRO, go to their website, sign up. It usually doesn't cost anything. I think ASCAP has a one-time registration fee. It's not a membership. It's nothing like that. It's just a one-time thing. I think BMI got rid of theirs. ASCAP's probably going to get rid of theirs shortly. So thing number two, establish a publishing entity, also registered with the PRO. Make sure that's all set up within your PRO account. Number three, register everything you have with the PRO. Maybe not those songs that you wrote in your parents' bedroom when you were 6 years old, but anything that has ever been played in a club or will ever be played in any kind of legitimate venue, register it. It costs you nothing to register a song, and it takes literally 2 minutes because you just have to type in some info about it. That's all you have to do. So just sit down and plunk everything you've got into that system, just so that they know that it exists. Number four, sign up for Sound Exchange. Don't forget that. It's an easy one, doesn't take much time, and you will maybe find some money there. 5, start researching licensing houses in your area. That's really the best way to go. A lot of these licensing houses have an interest in promoting local music to the area. They also like working long-term with individuals. So if I just send some stuff to a licensing house out in LA, they're going to say, we don't know you, whatever. I might get some interest from them, but I have much better luck going to one of the ones here in Minneapolis where they know me, they've seen me around, they know my music, I have a relationship with them. And plus, I can sit down and look them face to face and talk about the contract, which most people like when that's like safe to do, I guess. Then last thing, send them music, whatever you have. And by them, I mean the licensing folks, whoever your contact is there. You can just cold send stuff to those licensing agencies, and I encourage you to do it. Send them streamable links. That's what they want. They don't want MP3s attached to emails. Send them SoundCloud links or whatever, and give them detailed descriptions of what the music is. That's the hardest thing that they have to deal with. So you can save them work and make them like you by giving them detailed descriptions. Because what they get from studios is a phrase like this: I need music for this scene that sounds like a ham sandwich. And they're like, what the hell does that mean? How am I supposed to do that? But if you write, here's a track that sounds like a ham sandwich. This is a bad example. Let me give you a real one. A real example would be like, the studio says, I need music that sounds like a dark and stormy night in 18th century Italy. Okay? That would be a very realistic thing. And so they're going to look through their database of songs. And if you're good at describing your songs and you can say things like that, then they're going to be like, cool, this person's going to be easy to deal with. So send them some tunes, say, I've got a lot of this kind of stuff. Here's 3 or 4 songs that fit this genre, this style, things like that. And they might be happy to hear it. You know, they might not respond. They might respond. It depends on how busy they are and things. But I would do that, and then I would probably do it again if you don't hear back from them. Every other month, I would send them 4 other tracks. Keep sending them new stuff. But always be really polite about it, and eventually they'll be like, okay, this one that you sent me, I can find a use for that, and then you'll get a contract. Okay. Now for me to plug a little bit of my own stuff real quick. So if you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, I have hundreds of online classes through my site, Punkademic. Here's a screenshot of just a few of them. I know you can't read this, but I have a lot of Ableton Live classes, a lot of music business classes, a lot of music production, recording, things like that on the site. I have this series. I don't think you can see my cursor, but I have this series called The Musician's Guide, which is a whole bunch of classes all on business stuff. So I encourage you to check that out. And I think either in the chat or an email or something, Rebecca is going to send you, oh, hey, look at that, a link that's going to get you, I think it's 20% off or something like that, anything you buy on my website. So hold on to that link. It'll be good for a while, but I encourage you to use it right away because that's how things work. So check that stuff out. There's a ton of stuff on there because, as you can tell, I like talking about stuff. OK. I think I've said everything I need to say. If you feel a need to talk more, or if you want to talk more after, I'm going to stick around for questions. But there's an email address for me. j@punkademic.com will get me if you want to shoot me an email. Yeah. OK. Questions?
This is awesome. Thanks so much. I love that you're a music nerd as well. You know, you go really into the history.
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of people enjoy that here. So I'm going to actually go through each one of, like, from the top and go through the question and put the question up on the screen. And then we can take it from there, right?
Sure.
All right. First question was here.
Can everybody see this, what I'm seeing?
Can everyone see this? Let's see. No. Yes, okay. They can. They can. Yeah, everyone can see it.
How do we know what the airplay in the hair salon? How do we know and collect that? Because if we don't know the music was played here and there, we cannot collect the rights. Right. Okay. So here's how it works. So the hair salon is supposed to have a license with the PRO, not with you. So they have what's called a blanket license. They pay so much money per year to the PROs that just says they can play music. Not everywhere does this, but they're supposed to. So assuming they do, then what happens is the PRO has to know what they play, which is the trickiest part of this whole system. So you're right. You nailed like the exact problem with the system. The way it works is the probably worst possible way, but it is what it is. So the way it works is it's a polling system. So a couple times a year, ASCAP will call the hair salon in question, and they will say, what did you play in the radio today? And the hair salon will have to say, and they should be able to say, because if they're using a service like the business version of Spotify or anything like that, it logs everything. So they should be able to send that log. But that's one day. And if your music showed up on that one day, the PRO is going to basically extrapolate. So they're going to say, okay, there's a track by Gunty Music that showed up on this day. We're going to assume it showed up 10 more times, because we're polling randomly. So that's how it works. It's not very good. I've gone whole years where my royalties from ASCAP were almost nothing, and I had like tons of gigs and tons of stuff happened, and I got almost nothing. It was just bad luck. But then I had a thing where I had one night engagement with the Minnesota Orchestra, and it got picked up, and I bought a car because it was good. Royalty check. Work with an orchestra. The royalties are good. So yeah. Okay, another question. For that song that you wrote for the home purchase, did you retain the rights and just dedicate it to them, or did they own it? Even just for fun, I see this being a real thing. Yeah, for sure. So in that case, it was actually just a dedication. If they would have wanted to own it, I would have given it to them. but they just thought it was kind of a cute thing. So, and they wanted like a classical piece, and it's much more like a acoustic strings music piece. And it's much more common in that realm to put a dedication on the piece. So I did dedicate it. I did not sell the whole rights to the piece or give the whole rights of the piece to them with the purchase agreement for the house. But I probably would have if they would have asked. They just didn't know to ask because they weren't musicians. Yeah, good question though. How do you submit to your PRO for your own gig? Oh, you can actually do that. So that polling system that I just talked about happens, but if you know your music is getting played somewhere, like you are playing it at a gig, you can submit that directly to the PRO. They all do it differently, but if you go, once you have an account all set up, you can go in and there will be a button. I know on the ASCAP website, it's like halfway down on the left side where it just says report performances. And you can click that and you can basically type in like, these songs were played in this place. I don't know if there's a layer of verification they do, but you can do that through your PRO. If a song is being played on radio, but it's not been released yet, can I get a royalty for that after the release? Yeah, it doesn't matter. The release doesn't matter. Register it with the PRO now. You won't get backwards royalties from the PRO. So you have to register it now. Even if it's not publicly released, it doesn't matter. The PRO doesn't care about releases. So register it so that you start collecting royalties on it. The PRO will ask you if a recording exists, but I believe you can post date that recording. So when you're entering the information about the song, you say, yes, it's on, a recording has been released, and then you can put the date to be in the future. That's okay. That doesn't really matter. It's just for kind of data collection for them. The thing that matters is that they know about it, so when they see it, they can log it. So yes, you can do that. Do we need Song Trust too? Song Trust is is Song Trust the new name of hold on, I gotta think. Too many things. Sound Exchange. I think Song Trust and Sound Exchange are the same thing. Oh, no, they're not. You know, Song Trust is relatively new, and I'm not super up to speed on it. So the answer is, it's not going to hurt. So you should probably do it. And I'm going to make a note to myself to research Song Trust. I don't exactly know what they're covering and if that is also covered by something else already. They might be collecting royalties for one of the other things that we've already covered, so it's another thing that we wouldn't need. But they might be getting royalties for something else, something stranger. So I'll have to look into that. But no matter what they're collecting royalties for, sign up with them. If it doesn't cost anything, get your music registered with them, because maybe they'll find something the others don't. Do you have to renew your membership with the PROs? If so, how often? No. Once you sign up, you're done. There's no annual thing. You're in there until you quit the PRO, which no one ever does. And if you try, it will be difficult. So yeah, once you sign up, you're in it for life. Let's say I have my publishing through TuneCore. Do I just get the 50% of the writer's part? Yes. I haven't looked at these contracts in detail yet, but I know that places like TuneCore and some of the other distributors are taking publishing now for, I assume, in exchange for trying to get you some licensing opportunities. But yeah, if they have the publishing on those songs that you gave them, you will not get the publisher's part for those songs. TuneCore has it.
Can you then license and give away the publishing to a house if TuneCore owns the publishing?
Not without difficulty. The licensing house is going to need to find another way to get paid. Like, they don't need the publishing rights, but it's just the most convenient way for them to get paid. So you would have problems with that. Yes. So,
I'm just going through the questions. Sorry.
Okay.
This one. Do you know anything about this? Joining as a writer and also published in the UK is about £1,000. Insane. I don't know.
Really? For what PRO is that?
Yeah, I can go to the next one and then maybe they can answer.
How does one transfer publishing rights onto a licensing house? So, it's a contract, and then you do it in your PRO interface. So in the PRO, you just say the publisher is now this thing. And in fact, in my experience, they do it. They just go in with their contract into their interface in the PRO and say, we now publish this song. And because they have the contract, they have some ability to basically kick out the old publisher. At least that's what they've been able to do on my account. Maybe my account's screwed up, but yeah, you just do it in the PRO interface. If you're a writer, there's a one-off membership fee of £100 to join PRS.
This is a continuation. It was first this. This is the part that always get me lost here. This is Argentinian that moved to the UK.
Okay.
This is what they've asked for.
If you're a writer, there's a one-off membership fee of £100 to join PRS. A fee of £100 to join MCPS2.
And then this.
And then if you're a publisher, there's a one-off fee of £400 to join PRS for broadcast online live performances. Join MCPS2 for an additional one-off fee for £400. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, that's unfortunate. ASCAP at one point, when I signed up with ASCAP, I think I paid about $300. It's not that anymore. I think it's at most around 50. But I'm surprised that it's that expensive there. But I don't know what to tell you. That's unfortunate. Do you get royalties from music played on social media? It depends. It depends on how. Think of an example. So typically, you do not get performance royalties because the performance royalty is kind of superseded by the platform. So something like YouTube supposedly collects royalties for you and distributes them if you legally put up your music there. And they know about it correctly, then supposedly you get royalties from them. So they don't go through the PRO. YouTube pays you for content, sort of. I'm not really sure exactly how that works. YouTube's a weird one. It's another one. Like Instagram is probably the same as Facebook, where if you post music to Facebook and Instagram, you're basically agreeing to not get a royalty from Facebook. You're like kind of giving it to them. You're not giving them any rights to reuse it, but you're giving them the rights to host it because you posted it. So typically no on social media. For just in-home use, that is. If somebody, in theory, if somebody played your song from Facebook, but in a licensed venue, like if you were in a club and someone pulled up Facebook and played your track on the screen or whatever, you would get a royalty from that, in theory. But when it's just consumed in someone's house, that's not a public performance. Yeah.
This is a follow-up with the one on the top. I think that we were. What was that? Do you remember the question?
So, was that about the £1,000?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot. If I guess you'd have to weigh your options if you think it would be worth it to do in that case. But if you want to go after licensing deals, you kind of have to.
I have a question. If you have a new launch, like what would you focus on trying licensing old music or the new music that you have as an artist?
Well, anyone looking at it is probably going to be more interested in the new music. However, I'll tell you one interesting story. Just a couple months ago, I put out this new string quartet, and I did a recording session of the album, and I sent it to the licensing house I work with a lot and said, "Is this interesting to you? It's kind of like avant-garde string music, so I don't know if you're gonna, find any use for it." And they said, "We are starving for string music. We have rock stuff, electronic stuff. We have stuff all over the place, but we do not have string music, and we always need it. So yes." And so they signed it right away. And then I said, "Well, I got old string music up to wazoo." So I ended up sending them this piece I wrote when I was, this piece I wrote 20 years ago. It was a silly little student piece, and it was a not very good recording that I happen to still have, and I sent it to them, and they're shopping it around right now. And it's 20 years old thing that I wrote kind of like just to goof around, but they needed string music so bad that they were happy to have it. So old stuff is still good.
Are the licensing houses, do they work like genre? Like, are they like when they become many in your area? How do they different from each other, kind of?
Well, they don't a lot. They compete with each other a good bit, but some of them have different focuses, not genre, but things they work with. One of them is more advertisement heavy. One of them is more film and television heavy. So they're more connected with the production studios, on the coasts. I don't know what the third one does. I think they do a lot of advertisements too. So the one that I'm connected with is the one that does more film and TV stuff. I think internally they have some genre focused people, some people who are more focused at kind of curating electronic stuff or pop stuff or rock stuff or whatever. But and some libraries do that. There are some companies that are just looking for like EDM bangers, and then that's like all they want, and that's their niche.
Would you find those online, or would you find those in your area, kind of, that are very niche based? How would you find those?
you'd probably just find those online. If there was one in your area, it would just kind of be a lucky thing to have happen.
Another question.
PRO is the one protecting your song rights as well, right? No. The PRO isn't really doing anything for you other than collecting royalties for performances. They're not like, if you have a copyright issue, you're not going to go to the PRO. They're not going to help you. That's really the role of the publisher, is the one protecting your song rights.
What if you're your own publisher here?
Then you're the one protecting your song rights. That is like the definition of a publisher now, is the one in charge of managing rights. So it is the publisher's responsibility. So if you have a problem with a copyright issue, for example, if someone's copying your music, you would first go to your publisher and say, fix that. And if you are your own publisher, then you would probably go to a lawyer and start doing what you have to do to get it resolved.
I think we're there. I think we're going through the questions. Do we have any more questions, guys? This was great. I mean, you go very into detail. I love it.
Well, thanks. It was my pleasure. I talk about this stuff every day. Happy to do it.
All right. Do we have any last questions before we say goodbye? Nothing. No. All right. So everyone, I'm going to send the recording, the replay to everyone. I'm also going to send a link to Punkademic, so you can check out all the courses there. Soon there'll be some of my courses there, right?
Yeah, we're working on that. Yes.
So it's the start of a collab here as well. So if you like what you saw today, go ahead and give thumbs up to the video, and also go ahead and follow me on YouTube if you don't already. I have tons of free classes, free information there. So Jay, thanks so much for spending your afternoon with us. It's evening here in Europe, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. It was fun. Yeah,
no, it's great. So I think I had a question, but I will contact personally. All right, Elias, have a question, but he might send you an email, right, Elias? Is that
cool?
Yeah. So your email is there. So great. You have the good rest of the evening, day, morning, wherever you're located. Nice to see you guys all, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.
Great. Thanks, everybody.